out to the River Islands guest line because Bob Costas is with us again, because I think he heard there was some discussion about the Hall of Fame, Kruk and Kuip potentially together, and you had something to add. Is that right, Bob? How you doing? It's great to have you again.
Thank you. Hello, Willard. Hello, Dibs. Yeah, there's one area that we didn't talk about yesterday, and I've noticed that there's a justifiable conversation about the Ford Frick Award, which is basically the broadcaster's wing of the Baseball Hall of Fame, and Krukow and Kuiper. And I have some insight because I'm involved in the process.
Okay.
Anyone who has won the Frick Award in the past, Joe Buck now joins that group. All the surviving members of the broadcaster's wing, along with 4 or 5 broadcast historians, put together the ballot each year. And there's a lot of discussion that goes into it. And as much as I am honored to be part, in a very small way, of the Hall of Fame, and as much as I love baseball history and all my trips to Cooperstown, so I'm saying this with tremendous respect for everything that the Hall of Fame represents and all the people there who do a great job of making it such a wonderful place to visit, and the way they honor players past and present. It's all A+. But sometimes they are too formal and locked into process. And so they will not put, despite my pleadings and the pleadings of others, they will not put Krukow and Kuiper on the ballot as an entry. But we know that that's the whole story. They are so much greater than the sum of their parts. It's what they were together that made them great. And so since they won't put them on the ballot that way, none of us think that they should go on the ballot individually, because that's not the point. And if they did, whether it was one or the other, and even if you did it in alternating cycles of the voting, we'll put Mike on this time, we'll put Dwayne on the next time, they wouldn't get the traction because they're not viewed that way and properly. So I pleaded with the Hall of Fame to be flexible, but so far they haven't been. But I can tell you that those of us who have a vote, if that ever showed up on the ballot as a Krukow Kuiper entry, it would get a lot of traction. And if they didn't go in the first time they appeared on the ballot, they would get in eventually and pretty quickly.
And that's the interesting thing, Bob, because I think we talked yesterday and I mentioned that Mel Allen and Red Barber were both inducted in the inaugural year of 1978. So there is some sort of precedent that's there. And you make an interesting case because last year, Mike Krukow was a finalist. This year, Dwayne Kuiper was a finalist. So do you think that you're going to have the wherewithal and the ability to get these people to wake up and do it the right way?
Well, I always, chime in. I'm not shy about letting them know what I think, but I haven't been able to carry the day yet. The example of Allen and Barber is not a good comparison, really, because they went in because in the minds of the people who ran the Hall of Fame, they couldn't separate them. One didn't deserve to go in ahead of the other, and so they each went in as individual play-by-play broadcasters. Krukow and Kuiper really are an entry. Now, these things go in cycles. So this year, it's only posthumous candidates, people whose careers pretty much predate the 1960s for the most part. So I don't think, obviously, Krukow and Kuiper are not going to be on this year's upcoming ballot. That's like every 4th or 5th year, it's posthumous. But they certainly could be on the ballot for the next year, and they should be. And if they ever put them in together, which is how they should go in on the ballot, I think that the support for that would be overwhelming.
Bob, I wonder, along the lines of this conversation, how have you seen the Hall of Fame evolve through the years? Because it does feel like something where if everybody's very motivated to kind of make something happen, then that's what does lead to change.
Yeah, you're speaking specifically of the Frick Award?
Well, I mean, it can be anything. I mean, as you said, they're very, very married to process. But have you seen that breakdown maybe in other ways in the past?
I think the way it's broken down has really been just through the writers. The way the writers' standards have changed over the years, the some 400 writers. Don Mattingly, for example, never got as much as 30% of the vote. And yet others of lesser accomplishment, I just picked Mattingly out of thin air, of lesser accomplishment have gotten more traction right away, not because they're objectively better, but because the standards of the electorate have changed. There's more of a big haul feeling than there used to be. And then, of course, you have the veterans committees. And the veterans committees sometimes make up for oversights on the part of the big electorate and saying, hey, this guy was overlooked. We've thought about it. That's just a 16-person committee. That committee changes in each cycle. It's not the same 16 people. It's the same basic standard, though. You have to get 12 out of 16, which is 75%, which is what you need to get from the 400 in the big electorate. But I don't think that's because the Hall of Fame and its board of directors have changed their approach or their standards. It's just because the thinking of the electorate has become, I think, a little more lenient, or maybe the best way to put it is a little more inclusive than it used to be. But when it comes to the Frick Award, it has changed in this way. They used to have categories that made sense to me, made more sense than just putting everybody in one basket, with the exception of every fourth year devoting it to posthumous candidates. The reason why I was voted in was that I was in a category for national broadcasters. And that category included Al Michaels, and it included Joe Buck and others who did national games. So I got in, eventually Al got in. But then a few years ago, for reasons unknown, they threw everybody into the same basket. And I wrote a letter to the board of directors and said, look, this is like asking us to vote for gold gloves and throwing shortstops and catchers into the same category. How do you compare what a national broadcaster does to not just what a local broadcaster does, but a guy who's primarily a radio announcer as opposed to someone who's primarily a television announcer, or someone who's primarily an analyst as opposed to a play-by-play guy? How do you compare that? These are apples and oranges comparisons, and it had a lot more clarity when they had categories that made sense. Now everybody's been thrown into one basket. Joe Buck got in last year coming out of that one basket situation because it was just impossible to deny that a guy who was very good and did 24 World Series, more than anybody ever did on national TV, it was impossible to deny him. But in truth, this is a process that needs greater clarity.
And it also needs greater inclusion, and I love the fact that you used that word earlier, because with the regular Hall of Fame voting, they can now put 10 names down. So is there a chance that you can lobby your people to get, 2 broadcasters to go in a single year? Because broadcasting, as you know, Bob, is so inextricably intertwined with baseball. It feels to me we need more people recognized for the greatness that they've done.
I think that'd be a hard ask from the board of directors. I think they would want to stick with one electee each year, one sports writer and one baseball writer and one baseball broadcaster. And I would be content with that as long as they added greater clarity to the process itself. There are a lot of worthy people, but they should not all be in the same category.
Bob Costas is joining us here on Willard and Dibs 95.7 The Game. Hey, Bob, since you were kind enough to call back in, couple other things. Like, I know where the rules sit and where the recent news sits, but do you think in our lifetime we'll ever see Barry Bonds in the Hall of Fame?
Well, it's up to a veterans committee now. And very often it depends upon the composition of the committee. When you have more than 400 plus writers in the main election, those things kind of even out. But with a 16-person committee, 2 or 3 people can exert significant influence. And I don't say this to disparage anyone. The least worthy person as a player who's in the Hall of Fame, whoever you think in your opinion is the least worthy player, has to have had a very good and admirable career. But Harold Baines did not make it with the general electorate. He did make it with the Veterans Committee in a year when Jerry Reinsdorf, the White Sox owner, and Tony La Russa, who had been Baines' manager, was on the committee. I'm not questioning for 1 minute the integrity of either one of those guys, but they had their affinity for Harold Baines. Nothing wrong with that. But that's 1/8 of the entire electorate. in that case. So it would depend in large part. No one questions Barry Bonds' credentials. And even if some of the voters, as they obviously did, because the only reason not to vote for Barry Bonds, the only reason he wouldn't have been 100% in the writer's ballot would be those who held PED use against him. But if you looked at it this way, as some of us do, okay, we don't approve of PED use, and we don't think anybody ever hits a home run once every 6.5 or 7 times at bat without PEDs, and we don't think he overtakes Hank Aaron without PEDs, and we don't think he has a higher slugging percentage than Babe Ruth in some seasons without PEDs, and we don't think he exceeds his own established standard, which was a Hall of Fame standard to begin with, an elite inner circle Hall of Fame standard to begin with, but his lifetime slugging percentage through the first dozen years or so of his career was around 560. Then for a 4-year stretch, he slugged over 800 2 or 3 times and 799 or 790 another time. And he averaged 1 homer per 15 times at bat, again, through what should have been the prime of his career, and then more than double that home run rate. So you're out of your mind if you think that steroids didn't have an effect on his statistics and therefore on the record books. But you're also out of your mind if you think that Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens, for example, was a first ballot inner circle Hall of Famer without having used any performance enhancing drugs. So on that basis, you can make an argument for him. The question becomes, at the end of this long-winded answer, the question becomes, what's the composition of the 16-member Veterans Committee when Barry Bonds comes up the next time? Because you're going to have some hardline people who say, yeah, he's one of the greatest players of all time. And I don't care if a guy hit 800 homers and used PEDs in the last year of his career. I'm not voting for him. If you got too many of those guys in the committee, he's got no chance. But, you know, he's still young enough that his cycle will come up several times. And my guess would be, just a guess, that he eventually gets in through a Veterans Committee.
And I think an interesting litmus test, Bob, is Alex Rodriguez, who comes up this year on election cycle 6 of 10. He's halfway through. He's trending at 40%. If Alex Rodriguez eventually gets in by the voters, would that be a harbinger for Bonds' Hall of Fame future?
That's a great point. Yes, it would be. Because many voters, not all, but many voters do use a whataboutism standard. Well, if this guy's in or that, here's the comparison. Sure. And A-Rod, forget about testing or whatever, you know, A-Rod admitted to using it. He was suspended for a full year. He sued baseball. He did fail a test at one point. You know, here's a guy who on his natural merits would have been a Hall of Famer, no question about it. So if he were to get in, no one disputes the evidence of his use. If he were to get in, then I think that would improve the chances of others. Maybe it would even improve the chances of people like Mark McGwire when they come up before a Veterans Committee.
Hey, Bob, what do you think happens with, I mean, there's definitely going to be a lockout in December.
Yeah.
What do you think happens with this season, and what would happen if this bleeds well into the season?
I think what would happen in the long run, because the game is so great, is that it would eventually come back, but they would squander, just as they did in 1994 into 95, they would squander a whole lot of goodwill. There's a lot going on that's very appealing in baseball now, and you don't want to squander that. But I can tell you that the owners are dead set, even if they don't get something that's called a salary cap. They are dead set on some sort of adjustments here that give them greater economic predictability. Now, the cynics say all they really care about is controlling their costs. But within baseball, they're making a case that even though they've expanded the playoff field, and even though this year kind of undermines their argument, because around 2/3 of the teams still have a legitimate shot at making it to the postseason, their argument, and they have statistics and recent results in the 21st century to back it up, is that only a small number of teams really have a great crack at consistent contention and making it to the World Series. So they're hell-bent on some sort of significant adjustments. But the players are hell-bent on maintaining the principle, can't cross the line. It's a holy war principle. We will never have a salary cap. So when you have two sides that are that intransigent, this could be a game of chicken, and we'll see who veers off the road first.
Bob, you're such a great historian, and because of that, we definitely want to ask you this question, too. We didn't get a chance. Yesterday wasn't the right day to do it, but the Giants are doing something this year that's never been done in history before, and that is bring a manager straight from college to the pros. Mm-hmm. And it's been bumpy. There's no two ways about it. Yeah. There are reasons for that, but definitely wonder what your perspective is on that, the current state of it, and whether or not it can work.
You guys know that I don't dodge many questions, but I'm just not close enough to this day to day. My opinion doesn't matter that much. Mine would be a 10,000 feet opinion. I just don't know day in, day out to say whether Tello has done a good job or not, or how Buster Posey feels about him. So I don't even know if it's inconclusive. Someone might say it's inconclusive. I'm not even close enough to it and credible enough to say that. I'm not dodging the question. I'm just telling you that I'm not the best source for answering it. But another stray thought here. When we were talking about Krukow and Kuiper, as entertaining as they are, and part of what made them great was that they could be entertaining in a game that was 8-2 in the sixth inning, and they could be entertaining during a season like this when the team is disappointing and not in contention. But what they also have going for them is that their voices are associated with so many high points. We were talking about Barry Bonds before. There may be mixed feelings about Barry Bonds around the country, but in San Francisco, those feelings are pretty positive. And their voices are on all of his exploits in the 90s and early 2000s. And their voices are on the World Series runs of 2010, 2012, and 2014. And if you took that away, if they were just good as they would be on their own merits as broadcasters, but they weren't attached to those moments, then the feeling would not be as overwhelmingly positive as it is. They've earned that, but that's all a broadcaster can be, is adjacent to the great moments. They can't create them. As great as Vin Scully was, and man, was he great. He was the best ever. But if you don't have Sandy Koufax throwing the perfect game and Kirk Gibson limping out of the dugout in front of a national audience in the World Series, then he doesn't have the same canvas to be as great as he could possibly be. And the Giants, in their own way, gave Krukow and Kuiper a hell of a canvas.